The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and white, like any other bill. But when Maggie Thompson opened it, her hands began to tremble. You have 7 days to remove the wheelchair ramp or face daily fines of $250. This is your final notice. Maggie sat at her kitchen table in Maple Grove Estates, the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she and her late husband Robert had built their life together for 28 years. At 68, the retired elementary school teacher had suffered a mild stroke just 14 months after Robert lost his battle with cancer. The modest ranch-style home was all she had left. Her independence, her memories, her connection to her daughter and grandchildren who lived 20 minutes away. Without the ramp, she couldn't safely leave the house. She had done everything right. After the stroke, her daughter Sarah insisted on the simple wooden ramp. Maggie submitted the application to the HOA with detailed drawings and doctor's notes explaining her mobility needs. Weeks passed with no reply. When winter rain made the front steps treacherous, she finally had the ramp built. It was plain, functional, painted to match the porch. She thought that would be the end of it, but Vanessa Hargrove, the polished chairwoman of the Maple Grove Estates HOA, had other plans. The fines started immediately. Then came the certified letters. By the time Maggie received this latest notice, the total had already climbed past $3,000. Her savings, the small nest egg Robert had carefully protected, were disappearing. In the golden light of late afternoon, Maggie sat motionless on her worn sofa, the letter still clutched in her lap. Her wheelchair waited silently beside her, like a faithful but powerless companion. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, each second hammering home the reality. She was being trapped inside her own home. The same home where Robert used to carry her over the threshold as a young bride. The same home where she had read bedtime stories to her grandchildren. Now it felt like a cage. Outside, the neighborhood looked perfect. Manicured lawns, identical beige exteriors, the kind of place where property values were sacred. But inside Maggie's house, the air felt heavy with disbelief. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Maggie heard footsteps on her porch. She wheeled herself to the window just in time to see a man in a reflective vest pressing another official notice onto her front door. Right in the center, like a warrant on a criminal's house. The bright orange paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, impossible to miss for any neighbor driving by. She stared at it, her chest tightening with a cold, sinking dread. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Not over a simple ramp that let an old woman leave her own home. The fines kept coming. By the end of the second week, Maggie Thompson owed more than $8,000 for a ramp that let her reach her own mailbox. Vanessa Hargrove's office sent another letter, this one copied to every homeowner in Maple Grove Estates. It described Maggie's ramp as a blatant violation that destroys neighborhood harmony and threatens property values. The message was clear. One old woman in a wheelchair was the enemy of them all. Maggie refused to stay silent. She started fighting back the only way she knew how, with quiet, determined intelligence. She spent hours at her kitchen table, reading North Carolina HOA laws line by line. She recorded every phone call with Vanessa's office. She asked Sarah to help her gather medical records and photos of the ramp. For the first time since Robert died, something sharper than fear burned in her chest. Then the second blow landed. Vanessa arrived at Maggie's door on a bright Thursday morning, dressed in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, looking every bit the professional real estate agent she was. She carried a metal measuring tape. 2 other board members stood behind her like silent witnesses. Maggie wheeled herself onto the porch, heart pounding. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Vanessa said with that same polite smile Maggie had seen weeks earlier, the one that now felt like a warning. "I'm afraid the ramp exceeds our architectural guidelines by more than 2 feet. We'll need to schedule its removal immediately." She extended the tape measure with calm precision, laying it along the ramp's length while Maggie sat motionless in her wheelchair at the top of the steps. The metal clicked softly. Vanessa's voice never rose. She simply stated facts, as if measuring the final distance between an old woman and her freedom was just another Tuesday task. That single moment, Vanessa calmly measuring the ramp while Maggie watched helplessly from her chair, hit harder than any fine. No shouting, no raised voice, just cold, legal cruelty wrapped in perfect manners. The third escalation came days later. When Sarah pulled into the driveway for her weekly visit, a towing company truck was already waiting. The driver handed her a warning. Vehicles belonging to unauthorized persons would be towed at Maggie's expense. The message was delivered with HOA letterhead. They were turning her own daughter into a problem. Maggie's anger finally broke through her fear. She began digging deeper. That's when she found it. A public record from 3 years earlier. Another neighborhood, another family, another disabled resident. Vanessa Hargrove had been chairwoman there too. She had used the exact same tactics, forcing a young father with a prosthetic leg to tear out his own access ramp. The case was dismissed on a technicality, a missed filing deadline. Vanessa had won again. The polite smile from that first meeting now made sense. It wasn't politeness. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had done this before and never lost. Maggie stared at the court documents on her laptop screen, her hands shaking with rage. They weren't just targeting her. This was a pattern, and she was done being their next victim. The numbers on the statements no longer made sense. $15,000. That was what Maggie Thompson now owed the Maple Grove Estates HOA. $15,000 for a ramp that kept her from being a prisoner in her own home. The latest letter arrived with a new threat: lien proceedings. They were preparing to place a lien on her house. One more step, and they could force a sale. The home Robert had paid off with 30 years of careful overtime shifts. Gone. She tried to hold on to hope, but the neighborhood turned on her faster than she expected. At first, a few longtime neighbors offered quiet words of sympathy at the mailbox. Then the board sent another mass email reminding everyone of the importance of uniform compliance. Suddenly, those same neighbors stopped waving. They crossed the street when they saw her wheeling down the sidewalk. One woman she had known for 15 years, the one who used to bring over homemade soup after Robert's funeral, now looked away and hurried inside. Fear of fines had done what cruelty alone could not. It isolated her completely. The silence around her grew heavier with each passing day. Friends she once shared coffee with no longer returned her calls. The community she thought she belonged to had chosen perfect lawns over a widow's dignity. That night, the rain fell in steady sheets against the windows. Maggie sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the only light coming from a single yellow lamp on the side table. The house felt enormous and empty. Her wheelchair was parked beside the sofa where she had managed to shift herself with great effort. On the mantelpiece, Robert's photo smiled back at her, the one taken on their 40th anniversary, his arm around her shoulders. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers gripping the rubber wheels of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "Maybe it's time to sell," she whispered into the quiet room. Her voice cracked. "Maybe it's time to move to a nursing home where they won't fight me for wanting to live." The words hung in the air. Outside, rain drummed against the roof like distant thunder. Inside, there was only the slow ticking of the grandfather clock and the heavy weight of defeat pressing down on her chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, Maggie Thompson truly considered surrender. Not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in old bones when the fight feels too big and the world too cruel. She closed her eyes, letting the tears come silently. Then the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Elena Ramirez, a civil rights attorney who specialized in Fair Housing Act cases. Sarah had found her through a late-night online search. "Mrs. Thompson," the lawyer said calmly, "what they're doing to you is textbook discrimination. We're going to fight this." From that moment, the tide began to turn. Maggie's fear gave way to something steelier. With Elena's guidance, she filed a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They uncovered the full pattern. Vanessa Hargrove had done this twice before in neighboring communities, always targeting the vulnerable, always hiding behind architectural standards. The polite smile, the measured tape, the quiet threats, they were weapons she had perfected. Public pressure mounted when a local news station in Raleigh picked up the story. The headline read, "HOA fines widow $250 a day for wheelchair ramp." Suddenly, the same neighbors who had looked away began to speak. One man who had served on the board for years admitted in an interview that Vanessa had pressured them to target Maggie to set an example. The community started waking up. At the emergency HOA meeting, the room was packed. Maggie sat in her wheelchair at the front, Sarah beside her. Vanessa stood at the podium, still composed, still quoting bylaws. But this time, voices rose against her. Residents who had once feared for their property values now saw the truth. This wasn't about harmony. It was about control. One by one, they stood up and demanded the ramp stay. The board's power cracked under the weight of public shame. 2 months later, the court ruled decisively. The HOA was ordered to remove all fines, pay Maggie $85,000 in damages and legal fees, and allow the ramp to remain permanently. Vanessa Hargrove was removed as chairwoman. For the first time in years, Maggie Thompson felt the house truly belonged to her again. On a clear spring afternoon, Maggie wheeled herself out onto the ramp for the first time without fear. The wood felt solid beneath her wheels. She stopped at the edge, placed her hand gently on the railing, and looked up. A small group of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, some she hadn't spoken to in months. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They simply stood there, watching an old woman reclaim her dignity in the quiet sunlight. Maggie didn't say a word. She just smiled, tired, worn, but unbroken, her fingers resting on the ramp that had nearly cost her everything. In that silence, the question lingered for anyone watching. If it were you, trapped by rules that looked right on paper but destroyed a life, would you have the courage to stand?